Következő programpontunk Barbara előadása lesz, úgyhogy én itt váltani fogok angolra, és a tolmácsaink az angolt fogják akkor mostantól magyarra fordítani. Kis technikai szünet. I was just telling that I'm going to switch now for English so that you can understand me. And we are happy that we came to the point of the program where we will be able to listen to you. So Barbara is going to talk to you about positive emotions and the role of positive emotions in our lives. And it's very important because psychology for many, many decades has dealt primarily with negative emotions, and we really do understand why do we feel negative emotions and how do they help us survive. But we didn't know much about the role of positive emotions. And Barbara is the most well-known researcher now who is giving us a lot of insights on why they are important for us in our world, why they are important for us for our well-being, for our success, for our personal lives and professional lives. Barbara is the Keenan Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neurosciences at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she is also the author of two books, Love 2.0 or 2.0. I have heard both versions, and Positivity, and these two books have been translated into Hungarian as well, so they are available for you. They are also available for you here at the conference, so you can buy them one room above. So thank you very much for being here, and this hour will be yours to talk about positive emotions for us. Thank you very much.
It's good to be here today, and I apologize for all the behind-the-scenes technical difficulties that kept us a little slower, but all is good now. We have slides and we have time, and so I'm really delighted to spend this hour with you and share some of my most recent research and thinking, and I hope that will help you understand better the value of connection and positive connections between people. I want to also, too far. Just give a quick shout out to my team. The kind of work that I'll share with you is work that requires the involvement of many students, doctoral students. I've had staff members and really generous support from the National Institutes of Health, so I wanted to just make sure that they get their acknowledgements here. You can see their smiling faces. And one of the questions I'm going to use to organize my summary later is, what's a smile for? We all know that a smile is like the most obvious symbol of a positive emotion. And yet, sometimes we may not quite register all that a genuine affiliative smile may mean. And so this is a question that I want us to go beyond that kind of surface level of understanding what a smile is, what it looks like, to understanding what it has meant in terms of our evolution as a species, for our prospects going forward. And I think one of the things, at least in the US, people become very suspicious of smiles because they're used to sell us things, and you get greeted with a smile, and you immediately think, what does somebody want? Okay, so I think that there is a really important way to be able to bracket our suspicion and then see also the benefits in a smile. Doesn't mean all smiles are for our benefit, but we need to remember that many of them are. And one of the things I want to emphasize too is that when I talk about the benefits of positive emotions, there's so many different kinds of positive emotions. This is a quilt that one of my readers made for her granddaughter that has all the 10 positive emotions that I write about in Positivity on it. So I thought it was a beautiful way to introduce them to you, because I think of all the time and effort that went into making this quilt. Joy, hope, pride, interest, gratitude, inspiration, serenity, amusement, love, and awe. And so you can see that many of these are the quieter positive emotions. Gratitude, awe. They are equally as important as ways to connect us, as is the maybe more obvious ones of amusement and joy. And the framework that I've used over the last 2 decades to be a blueprint for my research laboratory is the broaden and build theory. And this theory has 2 tenets that are foundational to my more recent theorizing, so I need to give a brief refresher on these 2 aspects. The 2 aspects are broaden and build. The broaden aspect of positive emotions is short-lived. Emotions themselves are fleeting. They have the timing of, say, a wave. They arise and they dissipate in seconds, maybe minutes, but not days, weeks, or years. Emotions are short-lived phenomena. Even the good emotions that we so wish would last a long time, they don't. Emotions are designed to rise up and dissipate in response to our changing circumstances. So the realistic ideal is to have frequent positive emotions, frequent mild positive emotions, but not non-stop joy and not a continual smile plastered on our face. But the broaden effect has the same short timing. During the moment that mild positive emotions infuse our minds and bodies, during those moments, that fundamentally changes the way the human brain works. It changes the human brain in ways that allow us to take in more information. So just like a water lily opens and closes with the presence and absence of sunlight, our minds open and close with the presence and absence of mild positivity. This is not a metaphor. Our peripheral vision expands. We're able to take in more information from our surrounding when we're experiencing mild positive emotions relative to when we feel neutral. And so we need these moments of openness in order to grow. That's the second part of the broaden and build theory, is that the benefit of having these moments of mental openness is that little by little, those function as nourishment for growth. So I make the analogy to eating our fruits and vegetables, that if we want to be on a path of growth, to become a better version of ourselves, we can't just have one red pepper in November and that will be enough. We need to have a steady diet of fruits and vegetables in order to be healthy. We also need a steady diet of a variety of positive emotions. Mild positive emotions tend to be more consequential than intense ones. And just to have a steady diet of frequent experiences within our day. And because having that frequent experience of mild positive emotions is known from randomized controlled trials to put people on trajectories of growth so that people become more resilient, more resourceful, more socially connected, and physically healthier. Physically healthier in ways that we can measure in the rhythms of people's hearts, ways that we can measure in gene expression, in their white blood cells. And so the transformations that can occur as people learn to self-generate more positive emotions are measurable and reliable. One way that positive emotions expand our awareness is that they unlock other focus. When we're feeling positive emotions, we are less likely to be kind of wrapped up in a cocoon of self-absorption, thinking about, all the things that we need, or what is this trouble that I have, or what does this person think of me? And the normal mode for human mental activity is self-absorption. But with positive emotions, our awareness is opened, and we are like, oh, there are other people in the room. there are other perspectives. And also we I think, gain a level of openness where we realize, as our first speaker was sharing with us, that not all good ideas come from my own head. If I'm more open, I can appreciate the good ideas that come from others. So, and another thing that, a shift that occurs when people are experiencing mild positive emotions is that they think more in terms of we and us, rather than in terms of me versus you. So people are more ready to see themselves as part of a team, part of a community. And particular to smiles, there's some very interesting new work to show that when we are face-to-face with someone who's smiling, a smile could mean so many different things. It could mean, I'm genuinely interested in getting to know you. It could mean, I'm over here enjoying my chocolate completely oblivious to you, just savoring away, but oblivious to other people around me. Or it could be, there are kinds of smiles that are a little bit sneery or domineering that are like, I'm better than you. And it turns out people are not very good at understanding the subtleties of those smiles unless they're face-to-face and make eye contact. And the reason for that is that when we make eye contact, we, at a very subtle level, maybe not at a visible level, but at a subtle level, begin to mimic that smile. And with that mimicry, there's a neural mimicry. So our minds begin to simulate the emotional state that created the smile on the other person's face. And then when we have that little bit of neural mimicry, that kind of informs our gut. And we know at some base level, that person's not really for me. They're not really interested in me, they're just gloating. Or they're just self-involved. Or it helps you say, oh, this is a genuine smile. Let me come closer, okay? But when people don't make eye contact, when the person who's smiling doesn't make eye contact with you, and when we are not allowed to mimic, we are poor at seeing the differences, catching the genuine social connection smile versus another kind of smile. We know this because there's some elegant studies by Paula Niedenthal and her group where they disrupt the facial mimicry by having people wear a mouth guard, like a hockey mouth guard or something that prevents people from smiling. And when people are wearing the mouth guard, they can't tell the difference between these smiles, but if they're randomized to not have the mouth guard, but no other instruction, they're able to tell. So that mimicry is a really important step towards coming to understand what another person feels or what another person intends. Okay? And so this is why this face-to-face interaction is so vital. It's what we kind of know we need when we need to figure out whether we trust somebody. It's hard to know if you trust someone if you've never seen them face to face. And it's part of this is what gives us that embodied knowledge of someone else's intentions, which is the jargon phrase for that is intersubjectivity. I understand what you mean. Okay, so I've argued for most of my career that positive emotions function as nutrients. And then I used to say when I wrote Positivity that all of these positive emotions function similarly. They all broaden, they all build. That is still true, but now I believe that there is one of the positive emotions that functions as a superfood. Now my son, who's in high school and knows everything, says to me, there's no such thing as a superfood, Mom. He saw this when I was preparing, saw this slide while I was preparing. He's like, that's a marketing gimmick, don't you? I don't know, I still like the analogy, so I will use it. That there are certain foods that carry just really powerful nutritional balance. That if we eat these foods, we gain more than if we eat maybe a different kind of fruit or vegetable or legume that doesn't have as much. So if you've ever heard a nutritionist say that there are some foods that matter more than others, that's the analogy I'm making. So what I'm arguing here is that the superfood among the positive emotions is love. And here's where I want to turn from talking about how positive emotions influence one person's openness of awareness and their trajectory of growth, their broaden and build, to looking at how positivity resonates between and among us, and how that kind of positive emotion that we co-experience with others is a super nutrient for growth, for humans. And so I want to give you some examples of positivity resonance before I go into the technical jargon, so that you can imagine those moments in your life that fit this description. It could be laughing with a friend or laughing with a child. It could be celebrating, genuinely celebrating the success that a friend or a colleague has just had encountered. It could be holding your neighbor in compassion when they've just gone through a difficult time. Now, the most obvious emotion in the room when compassion is needed is suffering. And yet, even in the midst of that suffering, there is an element, a strand of shared positivity. Because if you're the person who's suffering and your friend comes towards you and holds you, that feels good. That feels like you've been seen. Your difficulty has registered with your friend. You feel understood. And if you are the friend who has gone to hold your suffering friend, of course you feel the pain, but you also feel, at least I could do this. At least I could communicate my love and support. Okay, so there is, even though the negativity is the most obvious emotion in the room, there is an element of shared positivity when people come together in these difficult moments. I think the cleanest example of positivity resonance, though, is smiling at a baby. Okay? So this doesn't have to be your baby. It could be the baby on the train, or on the plane, or in the restaurant. And this is because the way we connect with pre-verbal humans is with our faces, and it's with this little dance. We do peekaboo, and we are really attuned to what's going on their face by looking right in their eyes. And we need to be really attuned, because if we come on too strong, that baby's gonna cry instead of laugh and giggle. Okay, so we need to have like this pas de deux dance of positivity between us in order for it to work. And we know how vital these moments are for child development from developmental science that has looked at the impact of having a depressed caregiver. For children whose parents or caregivers are depressed while they're growing up, the one thing that, there are many things going on for the depressed caregiver. One of them is that they do not mimic the nonverbal behaviors of the child. So the child will make bids to connect, and the depressed parent is still. And so they don't get into this dance of shared positivity. Depression is a disorder of the positive emotion system. And so when the caregiver is depressed and for weeks and months on end cannot engage in this positivity resonance with the child, that affects the child's development for decades. It affects their social development, it affects their school performance into adolescence. Babies need this kind of warm, positive connection in order to grow into the best version of themselves. And this is why it's so important to take depression seriously at very early stages. It's not inconsequential. It really affects intergenerational development. And so we kind of think, well, babies need this. Why do we need this as adults? I think this is a vital nutrient for human thriving that we have been painfully overlooking. I want to give you the formal definition of positivity resonance, which brings together ideas from developmental science, as I just mentioned, and relationship science and emotion science, which are all three different areas of psychology and neuroscience. There are two views from relationship science that I think are very worth bringing in here. And positivity, just to let you know where I'm driving towards, I'm arguing that positivity resonance, these micro moments of positive connection, this positive dance that occurs between people, is the most elemental building block of love. So relationship scientists have argued or tried to define what love is, what love relationships are, and how they differ from other relationships. And one of those ideas is that the most essential ingredient of a love relationship, whether it's romantic love or parent-child love or friendship love, is investment in the well-being of the other person for his or her own sake. Not because they make you breakfast in the morning or pay your tuition, but because you care about their well-being. And another view that comes from relationship science is that when someone is invested in your well-being in that manner, it feels good. You feel seen. You feel understood, cared for, and validated. And those are three features of what relationship scientists have called responsiveness or perceived responsiveness. Mutual perceived responsiveness is the hallmark of intimacy, that people feel that the other person sees them, understands them, validates them, and uses that privileged knowledge of you for your benefit, not for their benefit. So I think one of the shortcomings of this relationship science approach is that it views love as love relationships as a status, something that you toggle into one day. Now I'm in love, and then that just continues on for decades. Well, we know that doesn't necessarily happen. Relationships end. But more importantly, love is not just a kind of relationship. Love is a kind of emotion, and emotions are fleeting. So what emotion science can add to this is this acknowledgement that not every moment, even if we're in love relationships, not every moment is characterized by the feeling of love. And also what emotion science can add is this acknowledgement that this isn't just a status that we toggle into our minds. Yep, now I'm in the category of a love relationship. That emotions are mind and body experiences that infuse both our minds, but also our hearts, give us a sense of vitality. And so they have biological and behavioral components as well. And another thing that emotion science can add is this broaden and build theoretical backdrop, which argues that, yes, there are some features that are characteristic besides a pleasantness. There's an openness or a broadening that comes in the moment of the experience. And that over time, those moments of openness build enduring resources that make a difference in our lives, that are lasting. And so the formal definition of positivity resonance is that it's an interpersonally situated experience marked by momentary increases in shared positive affect, mutual care and concern, and biological and behavioral synchrony between and among people. Now, these are the momentary features. This is the wave. There's an upwelling of these three key facets in a holistic manner. And together, when these three aspects occur frequently, they build over time a sense of embodied rapport, or we really had chemistry, or we really clicked. They build social bonds, and it builds commitment, loyalty, and trust. Now, a lot of times people will use the word love for the bond or for the trust or these more enduring aspects. My perspective on love, which is why I call it Love 2.0, is that we need to look at the most elemental, momentary building blocks. Because a lot of times we wring our hands and think, well, how do I create trust? How do I create loyalty? This theoretical model tells you if you can create situations that have these features that give rise to these emotions, that's the pathway towards building these other social goods. So there's an important preconditions for positivity resonance. And this is why you might sometimes hear me say, this is not unconditional love. I'm using the word conditions in a different form here, that's saying there are certain situations that need, or certain preconditions that need to be met before these kinds of emotions emerge. One of them is perceived safety, and we heard a lot about the importance of safety from our first speaker, that people need to feel safe before they open up and are willing to connect with others. With certain types of psychopathology and chronic loneliness, this is the most poignant thing that prevents people from connecting. People who are chronically lonely, socially anxious, and depressed, when they enter into a social interaction, their first presumption is it's not safe, that they will be judged, that they will be evaluated negatively. And so, because of that, they hold back. Okay. So, and we know that a situation like being in this room, and we all have a common interest in positive psychology, we know that it's quite reasonable to expect that we might have something in common with a stranger in this room and will be more likely to connect. But outside of this room, we may not feel similarly, where there may not be a similar sense of perceived safety. The other thing that's really vitally important, and we are losing this so rapidly in daily life, is real-time sensory connection. Through being together face-to-face in a room, making eye contact, using phones the way we used to, up here by our ears and mouth, not down here with our thumbs, and through human touch. I've already shared with you how important eye contact is for understanding what another person is feeling. And that is why real-time sensory connection is an important gateway or precondition to experience positivity resonance, to experience true moments of what I would call love. Again, taking this broaden and build framework, I'm saying, things that relationship scientists will call love relationships, those few amongst our relationships that have been elevated to the status of love, I'm saying that those grew out of frequent sharing of micro moments of positive connection, warm positive connection that I call positivity resonance. The key here is that you don't have to have a pre-existing relationship with someone in order to experience positivity resonance. You could share positive emotions with anybody, with a stranger, with, over the coffee hour, you can connect with someone new and feel like you really clicked. Those kinds of experiences are vitally important for human health and community. I think when people judge that they live in a safe community is an aggregate of their experiences of positivity resonance with strangers. So those, and researchers have shown that end-of-day well-being is even more related to the quality of our interactions with strangers and acquaintances than it is to the quality of our interactions with our inner circle of loved ones. Okay. Over the long term of our lives, our loved ones, inner circle of loved ones matters tremendously for our health. But just within the course of a day, our interactions with strangers and acquaintances is really consequential. So I want to just share a bit of how we measure positivity resonance. We have both self-report and behavioral coding ways of measuring this, and for science to proceed, we need to be able to have reliable and valid measures of our constructs. And this first self-report measure is one that works best when you use it in response to episodes. So what I'd like you to do is think back to one interaction that you had with someone either earlier today or last evening. Think of one episode that would be like, oh, the conversation I had with Nancy, or the dinner last night with my friends, or something. Think of a specific episode, and then just in your own mind, answer the 7 questions that I'll pose to you next. The self-report measure, again, is one that measures this construct of perceived positivity resonance from one person's perspective, and it was developed with my former doctoral student, Brett Major. So we want you to, having relived that particular episode, think through who was I with, what was I feeling, what was happening. What proportion of that episode, from maybe the beginning of dinner to the end of dinner, for what proportion of time, 0 to 100%, did you experience a mutual sense of warmth and concern towards one another? For what proportion were you able to attune to and connect with others? Did thoughts and feelings flow with ease between you and the others? Did you feel a mutual sense of being energized and uplifted in each other's company? Were you mutually responsive to one another's needs? Did you feel a mutual trust and respect? And did you feel in sync with the others? There's some work by a colleague of mine that says this last item captures the construct the best, but this sense of synchrony and warmth tend to go together. So, as you can see, it would be very rare for you to be up at 100%. 100% of the time during the episode, I felt all these things. People are more sort of like, oh, at best 50 to 60 to 80% of the time. That would be a great interaction if you were that high. And we use how much of the time because emotions are momentary. These are going to be momentary experiences of connection and feeling energized by each other's company. And what we found, again, through a series of studies, is that, yes, just like the theory predicts, people do not feel positivity resonance when they're connecting with others through technology. It's actually the more the episode is characterized by technological connection, the less likely you are to experience positivity resonance. The inverse, the more it's face-to-face, the more it's positively associated. And in a series of studies, across 3 studies, more than 400 participants, we see very strong and reliable correlations with flourishing mental health. People who are more likely to feel that not only are they happy and satisfied with life, but they feel like they have something to contribute. They feel that they have warm and trusting relationships. They have meaning and purpose. So flourishing is a combination of feeling good and doing good. That goes together with positivity resonance. It also is negatively correlated with depressive symptoms. So people who have more positivity resonance have fewer depressive symptoms. They're also less likely to be lonely. And in some of the 3 studies, but not every one, we see a connection to reduced self-reported illness symptoms. Now, these are correlational findings. We get them by asking people to think of their entire day, and for each episode, they're rating positivity resonance for every social episode. And then they're also filling out surveys of mental health like these, mental and physical health. Now, the direction of influence is likely in both directions, because if you're flourishing, it's easier to connect with others. And if you're connecting with others, it's easier to flourish. So we do not have evidence in this study for direction of causality, and my presumption is, or my hypothesis is that there's bidirectional effects. It's an upward spiral. I want to share with you some studies that I've done in collaboration with my former postdoc mentor, who I worked with 25 years ago, Robert Levinson, with his current team of graduate students. I was on sabbatical a few years ago at University of California at Berkeley, and had the chance to use an archival data set of long-term married couples that I had helped collect 25 years earlier, but now we have data going forward on these couples over 10 and 15 years. So these people have been married for a long time, we studied them intensively, and then we've tracked them for several years after that. So each of these amazing doctoral students and postdocs, Casey Brown, Marcy Otero, Quan Chen, and Jenna Wells, have been really instrumental in moving these ideas forward. So in this Berkeley study of long-term marriage, we had 150 married couples who had been married either 15 years or more, these people were middle-aged, or 35 years or more, these people were much older. And for these studies, what we had was people came into the lab in the early evening, having not talked to one another all day, and then they had a series of conversations with their spouse in the laboratory while we're measuring physiological activation and taking a videotape. The first conversation was sort of honey, how was your day? You know, sort of just chatting about the day's events. The second conversation was a conversation about an area of current conflict in the marriage. So we had the typical categories of conflict, finances, child rearing, how to spend our free time. And we found the one that they both agreed was currently an area of conflict. So we tried to identify a topic on which they both agreed they currently had conflicting views, and we asked, please talk about it. So we don't say argue, but we know that there's a good likelihood that some tension might arise. And actually the most frequent emotional state is a shared negativity during these conversations. We're also measuring heart rate and sweat gland activity and the degree of vasoconstriction in the fingers, among other things. We videotape their interactions. One of the reasons we chose to focus on the conflict conversation is that these conversations had been painstakingly coded so that every second of each spouse's behavior is categorized by what emotion was being conveyed. And this is a coding system called the specific affect coding system. It's reflective of its time in that it was created 25 years ago, and most emotions are negative and very few were positive. But we ended up collapsing across those and just looking at the seconds that were identified as positive or negative. Because even when people are listening, they're coded as positive, neutral, or negative, each second. So we have 900 seconds where each spouse is categorized as feeling or expressing through their verbal and nonverbal behavior, either positive or negative emotions or neutral state, while we're measuring psychophysiology. Now, one thing that we did was we wanted to create a new behavioral coding system that would capture what positivity resonance is, which it's more than shared positive affect, because you could share positive affect without it being warm, without it being synchronized. There was an example I saw amongst one of these couples where there was an older couple, and the husband said, "I'm not going to care when you die." And he laughed, and she laughed, and it was not very shared positive warmth. But he laughed really loudly, and she laughed really nervously. That could look like shared positivity, but it wasn't. Okay, so that is shared positivity, but not positivity resonance. Positivity resonance is something that occurs when we teach our coders about this concept, and then we ask them to view a 30-second clip of this marital interaction and say, did positivity resonate between the two partners? That is, did they show actions, words, voice, intonation that convey a mutual warmth, a mutual concern or affection, and shared tempo, shared smiles or shared laughter. So after coders became reliable in their agreement on using this coding system, we then, again, asked people to look at 30 seconds at a time, and each 30 seconds is coded as, no, this was not present at all. 1, it was present once. 2, it was present 2 or more times. And then we add that up, and so scores could vary from 0 to 30. And what we find is that above and beyond the shared positive affect that is coded through that other coding system, this, what we call BIPR coding, behavioral indicators of positivity resonance, is a much stronger predictor of the quality of the marriage than is simply the shared positive affect. And it's a much stronger predictor of the quality of the marriage than having low shared negative affect. Okay, so there's something, this fits the theory in that these micro moments of connection, the more of this warm, positive, caring, sharing is going on, the better the quality of the marriage in terms of husbands and wives' separate reports of their marriage satisfaction. And another way we've looked at the same data is to look at when are the moments of physiological synchrony. And so again, we have those 900 seconds. We divide them into moments when, based on not the BIPR coding, because that's over 30 seconds, but the original coding, the specific affect coding system is done second by second. So we can classify each of those 900 seconds as, was there shared positive emotion? Was there shared negative emotion? Was there shared neutral states? Were they unshared emotions? And when we do that, again, as I was mentioning earlier, the most frequent emotional moment is shared negativity. Shared positivity is present, but it's not the most frequent type of connection because they're talking about conflict. And what we did was we looked at the degree to which the two partners' physiological responses were in synchrony during those moments. And so this is a description of how we are doing that. For each second, we look at a 30-second rolling window and compute a correlation. And then we move that over 1 second and create another correlation. And so through that, through a series of correlations, we get a measure of physiological synchrony. And what you can see here is that during a moment where both people's heart rates changed at the same level, the synchrony score is high. And here's a moment where the wife and the husband's heart rates were doing different things and the synchrony score is low. And so that's how we get the heart rate synchrony, and we get it similarly for the other physiological measures. And then we look to see what was happening with the behavioral expressions of emotion during those moments, and we classify those moments into shared positive emotions versus one spouse shows positive emotion and the other shows something else. Shared negative emotion, and only one person showing a negative emotion. Or neutral, shared neutral, or only one person showing a negative. So I'm going to show you the data for the husbands, because when we look at the alone one, we can only do it for, the husband alone was showing positivity, the wife wasn't. And then I'll share the husband's versions, wives' versions. So you can see is that the moments that if you look at shared positivity, that's when the physiological linkage is occurring. Most of my emotion science colleagues are really surprised by this finding because they would think shared negativity is more prominent, it's a bigger, stronger signal, then that's the one that should be shared. What I think is different here is that positive emotions open us up make us connect with one another. We make eye contact. Through that eye contact, we come to feel the same way. It affects our bodies in a similar way. With shared negativity, it's more like, I throw this dagger at you and you throw it at me, and it's more like turn-taking. And it's not, let me look into your eyes and see what you feel. It's more, you're yelling at me and I'm closing my eyes and trying to defend myself. So the defensiveness, the sort of self-preservation that comes into play with shared negativity prevents the synchrony. That might actually be helpful, but what we see here is that our hearts beat together as one in those moments of shared positivity. We see this equally for the midlife and the older couples. We see it if we divide it by the different physiological signals. It's a very robust finding. Now you might think, well, why does it matter if people's physiology is linked? We found in some preliminary analyses, and this is still at the preliminary stages, so I will share it with that caveat and caution. But when you look at people's self-reported health 5 and 10 years later, we see a relationship to positivity resonance. So these are people's reports of chronic illness, less here, more here. Time 1 is where we coded positivity resonance. This is 5 years later, this is 10 years later. And so these were midlife and older adults. Their chronic illnesses are going to increase over a decade, and that's what you see for the couples who have low positivity resonance. But for those who have more of this, what I'm arguing is a healthy ingredient of positivity resonance, they show a flat trajectory, which is probably about the best you could have when you're in midlife and old age, is to not have an increase in chronic illness. We also see a very interesting association between positivity resonance, and the reason this doesn't go out to the 20-year mark, because we have data on some of these couples into 20 years later. The people we don't have data on 20 years later are the ones who died. Our measure of positivity resonance predicts who has died, who has left. The people of low positivity resonance are more likely to not be in the study 20 years later because one of the spouses has died. Now, we have yet to do a formal analysis of getting all the death records and then statistically controlling for all the other psychological aspects that predict longevity. But it gives us reason to do that study because our measure is predicting who we have data on that many years later. So one thing that I'm arguing here is that positivity resonance is a health behavior, very much like eating our fruits and vegetables and staying physically active. So just to turn to one other topic beyond the connection between positivity resonance and health. This is how I feel about our world and especially my country lately, is that we are becoming so divided that the social fabric that unites us all together as community is being stretched to its limit. And so I'm very interested in how positivity resonance and positive psychology can be leveraged to help repair that social fabric, to help mend and tend to our community. And so I want to share with you two as yet unpublished studies that connect to this topic. One is done by my current most senior doctoral student from Vietnam, Khoa Nguyen, and he's interested in the connection between positivity resonance and positive networks. And in network analysis, we're using a very simple form of network analysis here, but he gathered data from 2 college sororities and has people nominate others in their social network, and then sometimes those other people are nominating them for something, like I spend time with this person. So, and within that kind of network, each individual can be categorized or given a number on how many arrows from other people, how many people have nominated them. That's in degree of 3, and how many times they nominate another person on a given question, and that's considered the out degree. The questions vary, and I'll give you an example of those questions in a moment. But the variables we pull from these quantitative metrics of networks is prestige, the number of people who nominate you. Like if we all knew each other in this room and we had a list of everybody's names and you said, who do you spend time with? If there's one person in here that got 10 endorsements of who you spend time with, they'd be the most prestige. They have the most of that factor in the network. And then gregariousness is the amount of people that you might nominate as those you spend time with. So in this simple network, it's number 2 has the most prestige and number 1 is the most gregarious. And so through a set of surveys that we gave to every member of the sorority, we created a measure of empathy or prosociality as a trait. And people who scored high on that scored high on having compassionate goals for their interactions with others. They scored high on a measure of positive empathy and of negative empathy or having empathy for people's difficulties. So we were trying to rank order people by who are the ones that scored higher on traits of empathy. And so that's what this is. The other latent factor is the prestige item that comes from the social network data. And this is how many times do other people in the network nominate you as someone they feel close to, someone they spend time with, someone they share bad news with, someone they share good news with, and someone they help. So for each of those questions, we asked, who are the people in your network that you do these things with? And for people who are nominated more by others, this prestige factor is your reputation in the social network. And so what we find is that positivity resonance, I'm sorry this is hard to read, but that says positivity resonance, is linked to prestige, but it's predicted by empathy. That the people who have more empathic concern for others, and empathic concern is something that's going to play out in face-to-face interaction, but it also creates safety for the other. Okay? So when you show empathy for what someone else is feeling, that makes them feel more safe and more likely to connect. And so this is our logic for why empathy predicts who is more likely to have these experiences of positivity resonance. And then we find that the more experiences of positivity resonance that happen sort of in interactions with others, the more prestige a person builds within their social network, meaning they become a more important member of their social network, a more influential member of their community. So positivity resonance is what ties us in to community and makes us a more central and important member of it. And we can control for where people lived or their degree of just general positive emotions and their degree of gregariousness, and we still get these same effects. I want to just tell you briefly about the connections we are beginning to see between positivity resonance and virtue. And this is a project that's led by one of my other graduate students, Jenny Jo. And we're interested in day-to-day experiences of positivity resonance measured with that perceived positivity resonance scale that I shared with you earlier. And also virtues that are both enacted on a daily basis and experienced. So we're interested in the virtues of spirituality, altruism, and humility. And here, the kind of spirituality that we're assessing is something that might vary day to day, is the degree to which you see kind of a universal oneness between you and others. Altruism is prosociology, humility. I'll give you examples of these. Within the daily assessment, spirituality is assessed as, today I had a feeling of strong connection to all life, or today I set aside time for an activity that I consider to be spiritual. These are daily reports that we got from participants over 35 days. So they filled out this survey day in and day out for 35 days. Altruism, I experienced compassion for others today. Enacted is, whether it was big or small, I went out of my way to help somebody. humility experience, today I felt that I have both many strengths and flaws. Enacted today, I let others take the credit or enjoy the spotlight. Okay, so these are, again, these are aspects of virtuous behavior that are often in short supply in our communities, and so we're interested in what predicts them. And what we find are two key effects. There's a between-person effect, meaning that people among us who report experiencing more positivity resonance in our interactions with others are also the ones who report experiencing more humility, spirituality, and altruism. The more interesting finding, I think, is the within-person effect, which talks about the variations from one day to another. So this is a finding that would apply to all of us, that on days in which we connect with others in warm and positive ways to a greater degree, those are the days on which we also experience and enact more humility, spirituality, and altruism. So we get a little bit of an understanding of what makes for a good day, not just a happy day, but one in which we feel connected and we're bringing good to our communities. So positivity resonance, I'm arguing, is not just a health behavior, but it's also a really vital aspect that builds the common good in our communities. The beauty of it is it's free, readily available, forever renewable. All we have to do is carry the attitude that these kinds of connections are worth cultivating, that the kinds of situations that would allow us to create these are worth, making the time for. Just really briefly, because I know I'd like to be able to take a few questions. When we get to the how-to, it's not something that you can fake or script. If I tell you, I've told you already that there's synchrony involved with positivity resonance, it would be a bad idea to think, oh, okay, now I need to, just mimic somebody's nonverbal behavior and, kind of stiffly follow what they do. If you force it in that way, it's going to come off really badly. So don't try. The better thing to do is kind of genuinely value this kind of connection. And then we know how to connect with people. We just need to prioritize it and make time for it. And sometimes that means slowing down and forgetting about the long list of things we feel like we have to do, and then do the things that are actually more human and more important. There's a micro-intervention that we've tested and are in the process of testing, where we, in a very brief way, tell people about the concept of positivity resonance and then say, for the next several days, make it your priority to experience this more often. So you guys have been in the macro-intervention version of this, where you've learned, an hour's worth. And that seems to be related to improvements. If we randomly assign people to that micro-intervention, they show improvements in flourishing mental health. We know that learning formal meditation and the informal practices of meditation raise people's positive emotions and their feelings of warm and positive connections with others. So contemplative practice is in itself a good preparation. Even though you meditate alone, meditating sets you up for having a day where you're more likely to lean in and connect with people in a positive way. We've been able to show that in longitudinal randomized controlled trials. If you're interested in sharing some of these ideas with others, there is a free online course that I've developed on the Coursera platform that's now been taken up in almost 200 countries, which is about the maximum, and with more than 220,000 people worldwide. It's a short 6-week course, but it'd be a way for you to dive in more or share these ideas with others. A very simple life hack that I could share with you just as a closing way to prioritize positivity. Behavioral scientists have been able to show that if we ask ourselves when, where, and how will I prioritize positivity resonance, that simply having asked those questions and answer them as vividly as possible will make it more likely that the goal of positivity resonance will pop into your mind at the right moment. And so one possibility is when, where, and how would be when I'm in the company of others and we're all drawn to our phones, maybe I'll put down my phone and connect with others. So I promised to get to what a smile is for. The most common view is that we think a smile evolved to be part of universal human nature because it expresses our positive emotion. There's another view that kind of turns that on its head and says the smile evolved not to be a readout of the smiler's positive emotion, but to pull positive affect out of the witness, out of the person who sees the smile. And that intersubjectivity idea that I shared with you earlier could fit there as well. Others have argued that shared smiles and shared laughter is a way to signal, let's broaden and build together as a relationship or as a community. And what I am arguing is all of the above to create that life-giving and community-building nutrient of positivity resonance. So this could be why the value of this paying attention to the genuine, warm, affiliative smiles that we see around us is so vital, because that's where we find life and health and community improvement. So thank you for your kind attention.